Okay, welcome to Frontline Texas. I'm Ron Avery. I want to thank Steve Mason for having me on his time slot, which is every Thursday at 7 o'clock. And I'm here today to talk to you about property taxes and the special session that Greg Abbott's called, and that's going to deal with property tax reform, they say. And I'm also, the 4th of July is coming up next Tuesday. I'm sure everybody's going to go watch some fireworks. I know I am. We're going to do some celebrating.
Don't look up. Look straight.
I'm doing what?
You're looking up.
You know why I'm looking at that monitor. I better look at the camera, is what my good Steve Mason's told me. So I'm going to look. You can tell that I'm using my bifocals when I look up there because I can't see anything. But so what what are we celebrating? Is it just that we won a war or a bunch of wars, or that we have a good military and all that kind of stuff? We can stomp anybody out we want to and go destroy anything we want to because we're powerful. Is that what we're celebrating? Really, America was created for two purposes. We learned in high school that that America was settled and developed and created to provide for religious liberty. That was what I always heard. Well, it wasn't until I was working on protesting my property taxes that I discovered, and I'm looking for the authority for the state of Texas to impose an ad valorem property tax on people's property in Texas. So what I discover is a document by John Adams. It is his dissertation on the canon and feudal law. And in there he makes it very clear that America was created for two purposes. The establishment of religious liberty, and two, the prevention of the feudal system. And he called the canon, and he called it a dissertation on the canon and feudal law, and he called the canon law ecclesiastical tyranny, and he called the feudal law civil tyranny. So is property taxes the feudal system? A lot of people might say, well, hey, that's not the feudal system. Well, it certainly is the feudal system, because our Saxon forefathers, now we learned this in my appeal, which is now, by the way, at the Supreme Court of Texas. I've just come out of the Fourth Court of Appeals, and I'm presently in the Supreme Court of Texas, and here's my big old petition for review. It's got everything you want to know about why the state of Texas cannot obtain lawful authority to impose a property tax or a lien on your property for the payment of anything to the government for any purpose. So I learned from Thomas Jefferson. He wrote a document which is, what did he call his? I got it. Sometimes I'm in a hurry, I forget this stuff. His is called A Summary View of the Rights of British America. And he wrote that in 1774. And John Adams wrote his dissertation on the canon and feudal law in 1765. So all this was right before the American Revolution and the creation of the United States of America. And in there, he says that our Saxon forefathers in England owned their property in a superior way, unencumbered, and absolute dominion, he called it. This is something that could not be aliened. The king was not charging taxes on it. The state couldn't, whatever the system was, the king, of course, the monarchy, could not charge the Saxon people property taxes because they owned it like a king and a queen. And but he says that later on that William the Norman conquered England, and that there was some resistance to it. The Battle of Hastings, when they lost that, William the Conqueror then took their land and property and leased it out to those he wanted to, and in some others he forced and coerced into doing the same thing. But still, that left the greater portion of the property of England in the hands of the Saxons, who owned it with what the feudalists called a allodial title. So that's what I discovered. And then from John Locke, I learned that even a constitution written by the people and approved by the people cannot establish a lawful authority to impose an ad valorem property tax. And the reason comes from John Locke. He wrote the Second Treatise of Government in 1689. And Thomas Jefferson says that all ideas of American liberty come from two sources: Algernon Sidney in his Discourses on Government, and John Locke in his First and Second Treatise of Government. And so we're not just talking about some philosopher, we're talking about the philosophy, the political philosophy that America was based on. And of course, Thomas Jefferson wrote his Declaration of Independence, all coming from John Locke's material. And but from John Locke we learn that the authority to take another's property is not in the people. So you can't, people cannot, an age-old theorem is that, and it's called the Law of Delegated Authority, is that no one can delegate to another more authority than they hold in themselves. That just makes pretty good sense, doesn't it? So he proves in there that that being the case, I mean, yeah, you could put that in a constitution, but it wouldn't be worth anything because the people don't have that authority. And they can't delegate something they don't have to government. So this stuff that's written in the Constitution that allows ad valorem property taxes that is passed by the people is worthless because they don't have such an authority to delegate to the government of Texas. So, the state of Texas is cut off from an authority to impose or to impose the feudal system or to lien your property for the payment of taxes. They're cut off from a constitutional means because the people don't have authority to delegate. And so finally we come to what the Fourth Court of Appeals was just running out of stuff to write on, and the best they could come up with was that property taxes existed in the common law prior to the Constitution of Texas. And they cited a case and that said in there that a constitution is not the beginning of the law. It is a continuance of the common law that it was ahead of it, that existed prior to it. So the government presumes that anything in the Constitution is an accurate adoption of the existing common law that was before the Constitution. And the problem is with that is that that was just simply a mistake. That the common law, the applicable common law, that would apply to Texas as it would apply to every state in the United States is that property taxes is the feudal system. And the feudal system was outlawed in the United States of America. They designed America for the direct purpose of preventing the feudal system, which is anything that liens your property and requires you to pay something or perform something in order to keep it. So what are we celebrating, the 4th of July? We are celebrating the fact that our forefathers created a country in which all of us are kings and queens. We own property like the King of England, like the king of any king. We own property with a superior, absolute dominion. It cannot be aliened by any government anywhere, including the one we make ourselves. I had to, on my appeal, I brought this up and I showed them that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had agreed that the property tax would be the feudal system and would be repugnant to the common law of the United States. So I pretty much showed then that the Fourth Court of Appeals erred in claiming that property tax existed in the common law that existed before the Constitution of Texas. Well, however, even if property taxes did exist, that doesn't mean that it was the applicable and the lawful common law, because there are mistakes that are made in the common law, and there are mistakes made in a constitution when they pass amendments and even when they write them. So it's up to the judiciary to correct these mistakes of the common law. And even even Thomas Jefferson talked about the error that was made in the early times of early America regarding how people own and hold their land. He says all this stuff was started by mistake by lawyers who convinced these farmers that the king owned this property in America and that they had to buy it from the king and that they had to pay the king rent to keep it. And but these farmers, they being not lawyers, and they were busy trying to hack out an existence and livelihood in the wilderness and in the situation they had, they didn't have time to correct the situation. They weren't going to file suits and try to correct it. So that's, in a way, how maybe property taxes may have existed, but it did not mean that it was the lawful, applicable common law that truly applies to the American people and to us here in Texas. So, you know, what's going to happen, I'm afraid, is that, Governor Abbott has called for a special session and on several topics, but one of them is going to be the property tax reform. And haven't we seen this over and over again, really? I mean, we shouldn't have property taxes. There shouldn't be any property taxes. That's feudal. It's the feudal system. And our forefathers did not die to create America for us to become tenants in our own homes, in our own land, in our own businesses, and be renting our tools and renting our everything that we create. We rent it from the state. The things we create, all we're doing presently is creating property for the state to charge us rent with. They're the landlord. The state of Texas has become the landlord and the property lord. And everything we do, we're renting from them, and everything we create rentable property for them. And the whole process of what they call appraisal, the property tax appraisal system, it's nothing more than the state of Texas comparing one property that they've confiscated to another property they've confiscated. And they allow you, they granted you these feudal rights to go in there and argue with them about how your lease on one of their pieces of property, how it compares with some other feudal lease that somebody has, so you can reduce your rent. But that's not the law. That can't be the law. That's not what America was created for. This system of the appraisal system is nothing more than rent negotiation. And this stuff about they have the property tax bill of rights, property taxpayer bill of rights. That's a feudal system where they grant you some rights to argue the fairness of your rent. And that's not America. That's not the state of Texas. That's not why people settled this place and created this place and fought war after war after war. I mean, I don't even know why we're fighting wars now, because the problems we have, the people we're fighting have nothing to do with our real problems. The loss of our liberty and the loss of our property has nothing to do with anybody that we're fighting presently overseas. Nothing. Doesn't have a single thing to do with it. Apparently, the enemy is in our own land, and of course, ignorance is your enemy too. I mean, I can't too much blame some of these lawyers and judges. I'm sure they came from the same basic schools I did, and I'm sure they didn't learn this stuff either. We're not being taught any of this stuff. I had to learn most of this stuff in just discovering things and wondering about why I was paying property taxes. I always thought we owned stuff. Everybody, and see, one of the reasons is the state calls you an owner. You know, they say, well, Mr. Avery's the owner of X property. And he owned it at the, January 1 or whatever, so he owes tax. Well, see, if I really owned it, they wouldn't be taxing me at all, because they couldn't put a lien on it. So they call you an owner, but you're not an owner. You're a tenant. And they've messed with the language, messed with the definitions of everything, and people don't know really what they're doing or why they're doing it. We do most things in this country based on tradition that we're familiar with, things over our recent knowledge, But anyway, what I'm doing is, and I've thoroughly exposed this, the tyranny of the ad valorem property tax in Texas and the United States. I've proven it. I've got it all right in here. You can go online at that printed right up there, and you can go down to the bottom left-hand corner menu, and you can see that I have the whole petition for review there, and I have everything that I've been talking to you about is in there. But the other thing I'm doing is, for this special session, we know that they're going to, this is going to be a program where it's already designed how they're going to convince the people that what are they going to do? They're going to reduce the property taxes. The poor property taxpayer, he's under such a burden, and we're going to fix it for him. That's what they're calling this special session for. Well, how many times have we gone through that? Have we heard that? I mean, wasn't it just very recently they said we've had the greatest property tax reduction in the history of Texas? Well, what do you got now? I mean, you're right back out there. Mine was my property tax evaluation in 2015. See, it took me 2 years to do this this appeal. I filed my protest in 2015. And in that year, all my properties went up 450%, in some cases higher. It was evaluated 450% more. And on using the same tax rate from the year before, it had doubled my actual tax payments. And that's ridiculous. See, and this stuff's just arbitrary. I mean, they have no right, and they end up pushing you off your property. Some people are going to get pushed off their property, and they do get pushed off every day because they can't pay these property taxes. And they shouldn't be paying them in the first place. We own it. We own our property in America with an allodial title, like a king and a queen. And we shouldn't be paying on this. And that way, people are not penalized and punished for not being popular. See, if you're kind of unpopular and you're talking about things that annoy people or annoy the leaders of your community, they'll boycott your business and boycott your stuff. Well, if that happens, then you can't pay your property taxes. You see how that works? So that's how the system kind of just pushes you off the property. They want people that agree with them all the way around and agree with all their programs. And if you don't agree, well, they just boycott you. You can't pay they can't pay your feudal tenures, so you're off your property. And somebody who's going to go along to get along is going to take over your property and do quite well with it. So this is not what America was designed for. That's unlawful tyranny, and that kind of stuff needs to stop. Property tax needs to stop. And so what I'm organizing this year in July is this upcoming special session. And the special session, the opening day of it is July the 18th. That's on a Tuesday. And I think we're going to have quite a number of people out there. I know buses are coming from some counties. And we're going to pass out this brochure right here. And it's telling these representatives, the congressmen that are going into the Capitol, that we don't want any more tricks. We don't want any tricks this time. We don't want any more property taxes. We want that stuff stopped. No more pretty packages, no more fancy talk. We want it to stop. And I have the reasons for that right here in this brochure. And that's online too. If you go online at that website there on the screen, you go to the right-hand menu, go all the way down to the bottom, click on the link, and this brochure will prop up. You can print them yourself if you'd like. And everything I've basically talked about is in here. And as you can see, it's got all these forefathers I mentioned here. And it's got the lovely Chief Justice that wrote her opinion in here. And then it's got Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams made a very good comment about all this. He was in agreement. Samuel Adams is the father of the American Revolution. And I'd like to say, in my appeal here, all during this appeal, there's been no lawyer, no court, no justices have been able to cite any expert witness from early America that would be in support of the alienation of your property for the payment of taxes and fees or tenures. So you see, I have 4 or 5 major founders of the United States of America who have directly spoken and written by their own hand on these topics, proving that ad valorem property tax has no place in the United States of America or any state thereof. And they simply don't have anything to make their point with. And so I want to go ahead though and tell you what Samuel Adams, in fact, the way he said it is so good, and I never can really quote what he's said very well. I kind of do a little summary, but it's not as great as what he writes. He writes here, In short, it is the greatest absurdity to suppose it in the power of one or any number of men at the entering into society to renounce their essential natural rights, or the means of preserving those rights, when the grand end of civil government, from the very nature of its institution, is for the support, protection, and defense of those very rights, the principle of which, as is before observed, are life, liberty, and property. If men through fear, fraud, or mistake should in terms renounce or give up any essential natural right, the eternal law of reason and the grand end of society would absolutely vacate such renunciation. The right to freedom being the gift of God Almighty, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. Well, that's the solution. He's given us the solution here. All we have to do as people is take this to Congress in Texas, in Austin, and show them the proof that there is no authority for the state of Texas to lien the property of the people and force them to pay the state in order to keep their property. They don't have it. They don't have such an authority. They can't get it from a constitution. They can't get it from the people. They can't get it from the common law. They can't get it from history. And they can't get it from reason. They don't have it. They can't get it. And we shouldn't let them continue to push us around if they don't have it. So what they have to do is vacate it. They just have to say, we're not having it anymore. We're going to stop ad valorem property taxes. It's going to be made unlawful. Now, either the judiciary can do that. They can do it right here. The Supreme Court of Texas is looking at this right now. They can come out and say that ad valorem property taxes are ruled unlawful, and the legislature can no longer pass laws to collect it. And they've been hinting around at that for years. Well, instead of hinting around at it, just make a decision. You know, you're not telling the Supreme Court would not be telling the legislature how to fix it. Just tell them what you can't do. And that's what the people need to tell their legislature. Here's what you can't do. You can't do ad valorem property taxes because it's unlawful. It's a theft of the property of the people. That's not why we made America. 2 reasons for America, remember. One of them is to own property like a king and a queen with absolute dominion. So I'm asking people to show up in Austin. By the way, can you see that on the screen up there? We're taking calls. If you'd like to call in, we'll answer any question about this. So feel free to do that. I got the board right here. I'll answer them. But anyway, I'm trying to get people to show up at the Capitol on Tuesday, the 18th of July. We're going to have about 1,500 of these printed in full color, and we'll be handing them out. If you'd like to volunteer to help us hand them out, we'll be at every entry to the Capitol, so that no one can get in there without getting some of our literature here. And I'm going to, here's my little poster here I got on it. You can also, I have a Facebook page you can get on. It's got some of this stuff too. But here's my little poster here. This has got the major guys on here that I've used. I didn't use Frederick Bastiat, but I did use John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Adams, John Adams as the major founders that prove that ad valorem property taxes are unlawful. Here's our little poster about our meeting, our program we're trying to get going at the Capitol so that we can fully educate our legislators. And you know, like I said before, I don't expect these legislators to know this stuff. I think they're up there thinking they're doing a good job, thinking they're doing the right thing. They're going to give the taxpayer a break. Well, the taxpayer doesn't need a break, not the property taxpayer. He needs his liens removed from his property because they're unlawful. State has no authority to lien that property. So they just need to stop that. Now, I could think of several things. I'm not going to do it here, but I could think of several things that they could come up with fixing this thing. And but that's up to them. What's up to us is to inform them of what's unlawful and what we're not going to have anymore. See, this is our inheritance. I am so thankful, and this is the true celebration of the 4th of July. Our forefathers died, and lots of them, to create this country. Even in 1776. They started dying. They had to fight their own brothers from England, and they had to win that war in order to have this country. And it was about owning property like kings and queens. It was known worldwide that if you went to America, that was a place where you could own property. I've even heard a Canadian say that recently. He said, well, we all knew that America was where you could own property. Well, we don't own property anymore. But our true inheritance is to own property. So let's celebrate what our forefathers did for us, and let's actually go and show them some true honor by showing up, by saying, thank you, forefathers. I want to collect on my inheritance that you have created for me. I'm going to go down to the Capitol and I'm going to tell those people going in there that we're here to collect on our inheritance. We want our property. Our forefathers gave us property to own like kings and queens, and we want it, and we don't want this anymore. We don't want any more reform. We don't want any more lowering of taxes. We don't want that. We want property taxes to be totally and completely gone. Now that leaves them other things to do, other forms of taxation. And some of these other forms of taxation are lawful. And I believe in lawful taxation. If you're going to have a government at all, you're going to have to pay for it with something. And it can be lawful. But what it can't do is lien your property to coerce you into paying them money. That's what they can't do. And that's what property tax is. So anyway, I want to read you a little bit about here. I don't see any phone calls, but I'm going to read you this thing from Thomas Jefferson. It's a fantastic document. And it says right here, it says, William the Norman first introduced the system generally in England. The lands which had belonged to those who fell at the Battle of Hastings and in subsequent insurrections of his reign formed a considerable portion of the lands of the whole kingdom. These he granted out subject to feudal duties, as did also those of a great number of his new subjects, who by persuasions or threats were induced to surrender them for that purpose. But still much was left in the hands of his Saxon subjects, held of no superior and not subject to feudal conditions. There it is, straight out from Thomas Jefferson. Feudal holdings were therefore but exceptions out of the Saxon laws of possession, under which all lands were held in absolute right. These therefore still form the basis or groundwork of the common law to prevail wheresoever the exceptions have not taken place. America was not conquered by William the Norman, nor its lands surrendered to him or any of his successors. Possessions there are undoubtedly of the allodial nature. Can anybody give me a better expert on the common law that should exist in the United States of America and every state of the Union? It is that property taxes are feudal and unlawful. We shouldn't have them. We should get rid of them. What's the solution? Just like Samuel Adams said, they must be vacated. The grand end of society is the protection of property, protection of the ownership of the property, not just protecting a lease. I mean, the idea is not to make the owner into a tenant and then protect your lease. No, the idea is to protect the ownership of property. The reason for the state is to protect you as the owner, to keep the property in your hands, unless, of course, you've done something wrong with it and you have some kind of judgment against you because you harmed somebody with it. But short of that, you should not be able to lose your property to anybody or anything. So, and I want to read a little bit of John Adams right out of here. It says here, from the time of the Reformation to the first settlement of America, knowledge gradually spread in Europe, but especially in England. And in proportion as that increased and spread among the people, ecclesiastical and civil tyranny, which I use as synonymous expressions for the canon and feudal laws, seem to have lost their strength and weight. It was this great struggle that peopled America. It was not religion alone, as is commonly supposed, but it was a love of universal liberty and a hatred, a dread, a horror of the infernal confederacy before described, that projected, conducted, and accomplished the settlement of America. After their arrival here, they began their settlement and formed their plan, both of ecclesiastical and civil government, in direct opposition to the canon and feudal systems. There you have it, folks. I mean, John Adams, the second president of the United States, he tells you what America was based on, what they formed this about. And nobody, no judge, no lawyer, nobody has refuted these things. It's unchallenged. This at the Fourth Court of Appeals, at the District Court, at the Supreme Court of Texas so far, no one has published anything that can refute this. This is the common law. Common law that should exist in America is no property taxes, no feudal system. So there it is. And what do we have it for? And with that, since we're not having any calls, and I think I've covered pretty much everything, I think I will have we have some other stuff coming up for you. We can play some filler in here. It's been my pleasure. Please go to my website, check in, look at these brochures, and show up on the 18th of July on a Tuesday, all day long. We'll all eat together. We'll be there all day. We'll have some fun, and we'll educate our congressman about what we want this time. No more tricks. No more fancy talk. We want property taxes to disappear forever. And find out. And you know another thing that's going to do when you get rid of some of this unlawful taxation? I'll tell you what happens. It forces them to also get rid of other unlawful things. You know, when you're being soaked by unlawful taxes, they begin to do everything in the world. And they don't have authority for that either. Government, you see, I want to mention this. Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution says that all lawful governments are based on the authority of the people. Well, most people just assume, well, that means that all authority comes from the people, and they delegate that. But what's not said about that, and not commonly understood about that, is that government is also therefore limited, because people and individuals, myself and yourself, are not unlimited in our own authority, our own personal individual authority. Therefore, we can't delegate stuff to government, some things, because we don't have authority to do it. So we're going to find out, too, you will find out that a lot of things going on in public education are unlawful. The reason they're unlawful is because we don't have the authority to teach everything to everybody. The state has an authority only to teach that which protects your property. The sole function of government, government exists for only one reason: the protection of the life, liberty, and possessions of every individual in it. End of story. It has no other purpose for existence. And education is also limited in the same way. Education in Article 7, Section 1 says that the public education exists for to educate the student how to defend their life and liberty. And they drop off property, and maybe we know why, but it should be in there. So that's the purpose of government. That's the purpose of government-funded education. And that once that students learn that they own property, like a king and a queen, they respect other people's property because everybody else is a king and queen just like them. So you're doing two things at the same time. They're learning that they own property and they have a right to protect it and learn some means by which to protect it. They also learn not to infringe on other people's property because they're kings and queens and they own their property. So there's a lot less trashing of one another's property. The way it is today, nobody owns anything. It's all state property. Well, who cares about destroying state property? And that's just the state. That's a non-entity. It's a fiction. Might be a lawful fiction, but it's just a fiction still. But people, if they understood that everything out here is owned by people, by a king and a queen, they're a lot less likely to be trashing their property. And of course, the law, if they do, of course, they'll be in trouble with the law. But anyway, so with that, I think I'll bring in Steve Mason. I think he's got some other stuff he can play for fillers. I'm sorry there's no calls, and I'm sorry I went through that so fast, but I don't think I really have anything beyond that I need to get into at this time. Okay, thanks for watching.